started, I'll introduce you to your panel members. Pardon me for referring shamelessly through my notes. First here we have Mr. Tony Parker, local legend. Worked as Eisner nominated, known for Do Analyst Dream of Electric Sheep, Warhammer Fantasy, 40K, and many hero covers as well. Next to him we have Mr. Jeffrey J. Mariotte. Marriott, very good. Definitely a heavy hitter, more than 40 novels under his belt. Very prolific in supernatural and horror. He's also worked in many established proprietary titles, including, let's see, I'm just going to rattle this off because it's too impressive to leave off. Within the universes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, CSI, Supernatural, Spider-Man, Superman, Las Vegas, Conan, 30 Days of Night, Charmed, Star Trek, and Andromeda. Yes. And finally, Mr. Bruce McCorkindale, writer and illustrator. He's worked with pretty much all the heavy hitters in comics, Image, Malibu, and of course Marvel, DC. And let's see, currently you've finished work on Wishing.
Godzilla.
Oh, Godzilla. Okay, nobody's ever heard of that.
Yes.
So, all right. And I'm Mike. Just Mike.
I'm Mike.
So, yes, bring it in. So, the purpose of this is to dive into some of the idiosyncrasies, some of the, I guess, the benefits and some of the kind of dangers of working with already copyrighted and established titles. Not only working with them, but adapting from other medium to comic books. So, I guess my first question is how much liberty or how much restriction is placed upon you when you're first approached to make that kind of work, as far as how you can control the story and how much permanent impact you can make on characters.
Go for it.
Anybody?
All right. Awesome. In my long career in comics, I've not only written a bunch of licensed comics and novels, but I've been an editor for a bunch of licensed comics. The Star Trek line and other licenses, so I've kind of had that particular experience from different angles, coming in as a strictly freelance creator or coming in as the editor who's got to write herd on a bunch of freelance creators and keep them in line. Just a giant pain in the neck because they're all like me. And the answer is it varies tremendously depending on the license. Some give you a lot of leeway, some do not. When I was editing Star Trek, I had bookcases full of reference material because there were 35 plus years of on-screen history that had to be matched and adhered to, even though it often contradicted itself. And there are other licenses where they understand that comics are a different thing, and the comics are not going to impact what's on the screen, so they give you a lot of flexibility. So it really, you can do 3 different licensed products and have 3 completely different sets of circumstances in terms of restrictions and flexibility.
Yeah, I was working on a while back doing a Space Nine, actually, in the inking, and I believe at the time each of the cast was given the opportunity to have approval. So if you have a cast member who looked even just slightly off, then they can say, no, he's got to redraw that. That's not me. So it took a while.
Patrick Stewart once looked at one of the drawings of him and said, "I don't have those lines on my cheek." And the person at Paramount had to say, "That's cross-hatching, that's just kind of shading to give it some structure. But it doesn't look like me because my cheeks are..." So you now want to work with cast members who have like approval of you.
I really enjoy it with properties, so it's like the stuff I did a lot of the Warhammer books and properties, and by the end of one of the miniseries I did, I could physically count and tell you how many bolts were on a specific tank. I'm not manufacturing this. I could physically go through it on each panel because there was that specific on their IP, their intellectual property. I mean, I had like some early corrections where this gun barrel needs to be taken back half an inch. And I'm thinking, okay, half an inch on a page, okay, I didn't make a mistake. No, in scale. Whereas like this person will like, this is how big the gun was on the page. And take it back that half inch because it was that half inch too long. That fingernail's width was too much for them. So I've had stuff like that where Games Workshop is notorious for that, where they're very protective. And it's their sandbox, so being very protective of their IP. But when I've worked with Driving a Stream of Electric Sheep, I was actually amazed with how much freedom I had. Because every time I had a new character and new design, I'm like, oh, they're going to hate this because I'm not only competing with Blade Runner, but I've got a book that's around longer than I have. And so I've got fans who've loved the book for longer than I've been around. Combined with people that don't know any sci-fi, people that know sci-fi but not this, have seen the movie but not the book, read the book but not seen the movie, seen both, seen neither. But with a few exceptions of the first 2 or 3 issues, I was actually pleasantly surprised with how much freedom that Boom Studios and Electric Shepherd gave me with that. So it's, again, it's really the company. So.
Two quick stories in that regard. Chris Carter, creator of X-Files, is notoriously horrible in terms of likenesses. He doesn't like to approve anything. And I knew a writer, an artist who did an issue of X-Files comics. And he had approved the likeness drawings, but then when he saw the pages, he didn't like the faces on Mulder and Scully. And so they had to redraw the issue in a hurry because it was on deadline, in such a way to disguise, to hide every face. So it's like, here's a door opening, and here's a little bit of an eye.
So there's like no time to actually redraw everything.
No time to redraw everything. Here's a shadow,
Yeah.
lots of dark shadows. So don't work with Chris Carter if you can help it. Do, if you can manage to work with Sean Ryan, who's just had 2 shows canceled this year. I wrote The Shield, which is the only licensed publication that's ever been approved for the Shield 5-issue miniseries. And when I turned in the outline for approval, someone at the production company looked at it and said, "You can't have the cops do those things because they're breaking the law, and these are cops." And I said, "Have you ever watched the TV show that you work for?" This is the show in which, in the first episode, the cops kill a cop. Breaking the law a couple of times, not a problem. So Sean Ryan, the producer and creator of the show, stepped in and said, no, he can do that. He can do whatever he wants. This is comics, different kind of storytelling. Obviously, having the cops break the law occasionally, not a problem. So he was willing to give us complete flexibility with his property.
Okay.
So sometimes you want to go to the Sean Ryan, you don't want to go to the person in the front office who's approving this.
And there are other times where likenesses, I almost did some of the Farscape books. You know, like they absolutely loved my monsters, like my males, but my females weren't thin enough. So it was mostly because I love the show. I'm a huge fan of the show. It was distraught with the way the series originally ended, and big fan of the property. But I gave them a bit more. I almost want to say feminine curves because all the women on the show are very athletic. So I was like, yeah, this is good, but that's what kept me from getting that job was I didn't get approval just because the females they loved. Monsters were great, vehicles were fine, males were fine. Just they're so specific with all these things, especially with licenses based off of a visual property like a movie or TV. And then there are other properties where I've talked to people where they don't, the comic didn't get get the license for the actors. So they can't like, well, this is a comic based on the movie, but we can't use any of the actors from the movie. And like, okay, that's stupid. And well, even with mine, because with Androids, it's based loosely based Blade Runner off of it. And that's one of the big things throughout the whole book was none of the characters can look like anyone in the movie. None of the scenes can look like anyone in the movie. In fact, you can't do anything that looks like it's Japanese. Like I had this one scene where it's down a back alley, and I made like the Hollywood stereotypical Japanese back alley with the banners, everything hanging, and they came back saying, yeah, you can't do that. You got to change all that because it looks too much like we can't have anything even remotely close to it because we don't want to get sued because of how different rights were set down. So I turned all the banners into hanging laundry. So you learn little tricks like that, but it's weird with licensing. with multi-tiered licensing with things like that.
That's really weird with Toho on Godzilla, because I think this is the first time they've actually allowed a lot of the other characters like Mothra and Batra and Anguirus to be in the book, so they're even more twitchy than I think they normally are. And the problem is, it's not necessarily a big deal to actually make these revisions, but sometimes if they don't like something, they'll send back just huge PDFs full of different photos. Says, well, just use these as a reference, and they can be from 5 different movies.
So it's 5 different versions.
Yeah, so they'll have like 5 different versions of Godzilla or Mothra, and it's like, which one would you prefer? Actually, for the cover of issue 2, we did an illustration, basically just more promotion, but they liked it a lot, so they wanted to use it for the cover. So it's one of the alternate, the variant covers for number 2. But the head, you wouldn't know this unless you heard this here. So this is like a bonus for you. There's actually 5 different heads we had to draw for that cover.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The rest was fine, the body, everything, but 5 different heads.
I've done that as well for pages as well, where it's wrong. So I've got a full sheet of redrawing that face. Just because, and again, my big thing with that, it's their sandbox. This is their, I've always loved the properties we've worked on, but it's one of those things where this is their thing.
I think there's also maybe one good thing, the digital revolution too, is it's much easier to do this now with Photoshop sometimes.
Yes.
Than actually back in the day. I think we had computers when I was doing Deep Space Nine, but still it was pretty early on, and people were not really that using Photoshop all that much. So really, it was just basically cutting and pasting.
Physically.
Yeah.
Doing outline.
When I was a Star Trek editor, I got Jim Lee, who's one of the biggest names in comics, to do a cover of 7 of 9. And Paramount made me have the illustrations' breasts reduced in Photoshop because Jim drew them too big, as if that wasn't
7 of
9. The goal of the character in the first place. So, I'm kind of for Photoshop.
Yes.
Yes.
Minimization surgery.
Oh, so many times where it's going through that, or like, well, this sounds great, swap this. This sounds okay. Now I've actually redrawn a page 5 times just for the top line of the words. Yeah, it's not what we're fitting, not what we're fitting. I know because with the book I worked on, it's for 24 issues. The first 3 issues, first issue up to the first 3 were essentially the first round of boxing match. Me figuring out what they want, them figuring out what I want, because it's much more of a guessing game than with regular books. Because with other properties I've worked on, there's a degree of leeway that's allowed. When we're working on licensed property, they're very specific on what they're looking for. So a lot of it's trying, testing, realizing that whatever you put in will be rejected. So it's a lot of play, but it's looking a lot of fun playing in other people's sandboxes.
And sometimes it's kind of the advertising world does the same trick, but a lot of times you might throw in just something really, really obvious that they're going to spot. Just to kind of focus in on that. Okay. But a lot of times, they're very conscientious and they're doing it for a reason, but other times you do get the sense that maybe they're just doing this just to be finicky. It's kind of nice sometimes just to throw them a little something, you want to find something.
Put their fingerprints on it. Then I've dealt with people who aren't familiar with comics when doing these things. So they're either in the writing process where they got a writer who has never written comics before and writes it as a TV screenplay or movie screenplay. Like, yeah, this doesn't work in comics. You can't do this in comics and this in comics. Or the inverse where like, I've got this great scene, great palette, sets everything up perfectly. Yeah, they don't like that. But it's exactly what they need to be there. Yeah, they don't get it. And the other thing I've discovered with this very early on is don't fight for it. It's really not worth it. It's not worth the time, not worth the effort. Is with the rare exception of, to my editor, like, okay, well, are you sure it's okay? No, they want it. Okay, cool. I'll have the correction as soon as possible because the people that are holding the IP, whether or not they know comics, they know what they like. And they'll go through and they'll like, yeah, this is our stuff. You do, by our contract, you do what we tell you to do. So therefore, you fix this. And I've had a lot, and sometimes it's ended up better. I'd like the end result better, but it's with these things, especially since a lot of them aren't familiar with the language of comics or the production or how it's done. There are a lot of times you have to go through and just, you suck it up, you fix it, and other people talk to it. Because I actually showed one of the portfolio, like a Warhammer portfolio to DC when they called me up in San Diego. I'm like, oh yeah, this is great, this is nice, fix, not big on this. Yeah, see right here you switch from this scene to this scene in the middle of the page. I'm like, And you're normally not supposed to like argue with them, but I had to say that wasn't me, that was in the script. Really? Yeah, it was in the script. The person who did this doesn't write comics, they write novels, or they write other things. And, oh, okay, yeah. So there's a lot of playing around with it, a lot of leeway you've got to make for yourself.
I feel kind of bad too for the writers. I imagine it's got to be frustrating because sometimes, like on Godzilla, we're coming up to issue 4, and Eric Powell is writing it, who's has a very kind of twisted sense of humor. So
oh yeah,
it's kind of nice when
the translations alone must be difficult.
Yeah, and I think one thing they didn't want, they didn't really like having President Obama in there, so he's now President Ogden. I mean, it's very obviously very long, but and I don't think they quite understand that that's actually a pretty old kind of a convention. You know, having political figures in your comics is really just not going to ruffle President Obama.
It could be a cultural thing as well.
Yeah, but they, I felt bad because he had in issue 4, a little bit of a satire. They had the cast of Jersey Skanks was the name of the show. Of course, I see the script first and I'm working on it, and then eventually I see the proof of the book, and it's now Jersey-fied. I was like, oh, I like Jersey Skanks. Because I had a nice scene where they actually had some like kind of typical airheaded morning talk show personalities saying, oh, and we got the cast of Jersey Skanks. So Fred, who's your favorite skank? It just doesn't work as well with Jersey-fied.
Who's your favorite fight?
I've always felt bad for editors with that, because for me on mine, I'm the tail end of it. I'm like, here's the end, here's the fix with the editors, because I know they'll fight for stuff. Or it's like, yeah, this is good, but it works, and having to go between everyone, having to deliver the bad news to the creative team, or having to try to deal with people working like, was it the holders of the IP, and then do this boss, having to deal with all the different balls in the air with that. Because when you work with, that's one big thing a lot of people don't realize, is when you work with the licensed property, that is a whole different layer to it. So you have essentially give yourself an additional month on production for it. I mean, for Androids, I actually finished work on that back in March, and for a 24 issues series. And only up to issue 22 is out now. We were that far ahead on it because we needed that extra leeway, because when it started off, we were really tight deadlines to try to catch up to that. I actually did the first 12 issues in 11 months for pencil and inks. But whenever you're working with licensed properties, you've got to give yourself that extra barrier, that extra buffer, because with Warhammer, I mean, like, how's it go? How's this going? Does it work? What's the problem? We still haven't heard back from them. You heard back yet? Nope. How about now? Nope. But the deadline was yesterday. Yeah, I know. We still haven't heard anything back. So with different companies, some companies are great about it. I mean, Electric Shepherd was wonderful about a quick turnaround. But they didn't have a whole lot of things to deal with as far as I'm aware. But with Games Workshop, they have so many different things, their hands in so many different pots, that they don't have the time to give as much focus to such a time-sensitive thing when they're doing comics as well as their regular business, as well as video games, multimedia, and everything else. The people doing the comic adaptation will get put below the people doing the video game for some reason. So it's one of those things where when you work with licensed properties, you got to give the leeway for that and for the corrections, because you have another whole 2 or 3 sets of editorial to go through. So that's why I really feel bad for the editors involved with these things.
Most of these companies don't have someone whose job it is to approve licensed comics. They have sometimes an outside licensing agency who handles all their licensing. So it's not even someone in-house for them. Or they have an in-house person who, like Tony says, is doing licensing for video games and books and comics and t-shirts and beach towels and everything. And so comics is a tiny part of a huge licensing program. I write CSI novels, and CBS has someone who just does licensed publishing, and she's great. She's very responsive, and she can get answers from CSI really quickly, and so they're very helpful. Other companies, like he says, stuff goes in and it gets lost in this black hole at the production company, and it can take forever to get back out again.
And then after a while, you have to just like suck it up, do stuff, because you have a production schedule to keep.
Your deadline doesn't change
because they haven't gotten back to you, so you just go on accepting. You often do corrections. I mean, I created all sorts of tricks and little traps to expedite the production for it. Because, like, yeah, I don't have time for this. I was to the point for Warhammer, I would actually just went out and bought the models, take pictures of the models, and then lightboard the models onto there, because that's the only way to make the Games Workshop happy. I mean, it's a time saver, yeah, to a degree, because you still have to play with it a little bit here and there, but again, I'm not kidding about knowing all the nuts and bolts of different Warhammer different tanks, because that has too many air vents. It's 4. They're supposed to be only 3. Those are actual notes where they go through and then they scale up and down and all over the place, because they're very. It's not like, oh, Warhammer, you don't know poo-poo heads, let it go. It's not that at all. It's because their fan base is so hardcore with it that they will go and they'll put on message boards and they'll be like, this guy sucks. He put 28 bolts when they're only 26. What? They will.
Oh, yeah.
They're very. It's not like, oh, those people suck.
Hardcore fans.
They're very hardcore, especially the money they put into Warhammer. They're very hardcore with it. So therefore, be very respectful. Like with Farscape, the likenesses, the women there are so beautiful. I'm not surprised they didn't get the job, because they have to be so on target with this build, because all people that read that expect to see the incredibly amazingly beautiful Claudia Black there. That's what looks kind of like her. They want to see directly what she looks like. So therefore, they have to be. It's not them being malicious or being angry. It's their toy. It's their sandbox. They would be very protective of it.
I was kind of a funny story. I think when I was working on Deep Space Nine, I think we were working on an annual, and it turned out to be Brian Michael Bendis's, I think, first and one of his only penciling jobs.
Hey, at least he got one.
He got one, but it was funny because it looked like he fairly rushed, and that was probably the most correction I'd ever seen by the time it actually saw print. I kind of looked at it and thought, I vaguely remember inking that. But later on, I saw an interview somewhere where they were asking him about doing this, and he goes, oh yeah, I didn't know what I was doing back then. I was just trying to get in the business. I really had no clue. I hadn't even seen Deep Space Nine, so I ran out and bought some trading cards.
That's what it takes sometimes. I mean, when you're in the job, it's like, do you know this? Oh, I love it. Have you ever seen it? No. That's what really happens. You have to go through and because I was familiar with Warhammer, but I never played it. I didn't read Do Android Stream of Electric Sheep until halfway through the second. I was halfway through the second issue, like drawing the second issue, and I went, oh wow, I've got to reverse engineer all of these things. I've got to go through and correct all these things. Yeah, I'm like, okay, now I see why these notes that they're saying back make sense, because I was going off of Blade Runner. So it's one of those things where, with licensed properties, they're a lot more complex than normal, because Batman, yeah, guy pointy ear suit, you're pretty straightforward. Do something like, again, like a CSI, or especially Star Trek, you can't just throw some aliens in the background. You have to know the aliens you put back there. Like, look, it's Star Wars, Star Trek, close enough. Wrong. So you really have to be very, with the licensed properties, they're great fun to work in. In many ways, I like being part of the mythos and being part of that community. But in many ways, there's a lot more work to it.
To write licensed stuff, you don't have to love it, and sometimes they prefer it if you don't, because people who are totally into a property can come with their own agenda. It's like, well, I really love CSI, and I really think that Grissom should get together with Catherine, so I'm going to do that in my book. So, no, back up. You have to reflect what's on the show, whether or not you were happy with this decision or that decision that the show made. So it's good if you're a fan of something, especially important to find something in it that you do love, that you can really relate to tell those stories. But when you're an editor and you're looking for a writer for licensed properties, you usually, if someone says, oh yeah, I live and breathe that show, that's the only thing I ever do. Watch that show and play with my toys. That's the person and you know what, thanks. We'll call you.
Yeah. And with the artists, it's actually a bit more than I play with the toys part of it, because they've got all the reference there, and you're not. That's why I'm very happy being an illustrator, not a writer, because I get the script. I'm like, okay, now I just have to figure out how to draw this stuff. But in many ways, all the hard work is done. I have to worry about the plot progression, different thematic. I'll still play with thematic concepts if I can fit them in there. Visual themes and repeating things. I did that with androids. I put a lot of things in androids that weren't anywhere in the book. Where I love this because I made an allusion to the movie with a couple allusions to the movie and the book that people don't realize. Like some people think in the movie that maybe Deckard is an android. In the book, it's nowhere there. It's not even remotely close. However, if you go through and read the book, I've got all the androids are left-handed. So is Deckard. So if the whole thing is like, wait a minute, he could. If you come in from Blade Runner, like, well, Mike, he may be an android. See how everyone else is going left-handed guys going from left-handed, writing left-handed. He might be too. But in the book, it doesn't even insinuate it in the least. It's totally a construction of the movie. Or one little quick thing I put in there was, early in the book, he gets a bullet hole in his jacket, in his trench coat. And if you follow that bullet hole throughout the book, from there on, it actually is in strategic places, very thematic places throughout the rest of the series. So, they never reference the bullet hole again in the book, or anything just, and it's not even getting shot. There's not even a part in the book where he gets shot through the jacket, or shoots through the jacket. But I can go through, I can play with it, I can make it my own a bit, but still maintain the integrity of the book, not taking away or contradicting anything within that.